There are returns in Genoa City that feel like comfort, and then there are returns that feel like judgment. Malcolm's arrival carries both. To Lily and Devon, he is not just family coming home. He is memory itself, a face tied to a version of life that once felt larger, warmer, and less poisoned by suspicion. His presence should have brought relief, the kind that settles over a fractured family when someone charismatic and beloved steps back into the room. Instead, his return creates a strange pressure in the air, because Malcolm does not move like a man who has simply come to reconnect. He moves like someone rehearsing what he will say once the damage can no longer be contained. Every embrace feels slightly delayed, every smile just a fraction too careful, every quiet look across a room full of people carrying more meaning than comfort. That is what makes his homecoming dangerous. Not the affection, the concealment. Lily feels it first because Lily has spent too much of her life learning how to read disaster before it speaks. She knows the difference between tenderness and guilt, between nostalgia and avoidance. When Malcolm looks at her, he is filled with love, but there is also apology in his eyes. An apology from a man like Malcolm never arrives without a storm attached to it. She tries to hold on to the warmth of having him back, tries to tell herself that not every secret has to become a knife, but Genoa City has trained her too well for blind optimism. She has lived through betrayals wrapped in family language, manipulations disguised as protection, and truths withheld until they became weapons. So when Malcolm hesitates, when he pauses at the wrong moments, when certain names seem to disturb him more than they should, Lily feels the old fury beginning to rise in her chest. It is not yet rage directed at him. It is the rage of someone exhausted by the idea that love in her world is always followed by a price. Devon responds differently. Where Lily becomes sharper, Devon becomes quieter. He studies Malcolm with the discipline of a man who has learned to distrust emotional timing. Devon understands that family reunions in this town are rarely just reunions. They are openings. They are the first move in a game someone else has already been playing. He welcomes Malcolm sincerely, but beneath that sincerity is a growing suspicion that the timing of this return is too precise to be random. Malcolm has not come back merely because he missed home. He has come back because something has forced him to stop running from a truth that has finally become impossible to manage from a distance. Devon does not want to believe it. He wants one uncomplicated family moment, one scene not infected by hidden agendas. But the longer he watches Malcolm struggle under the weight of his own restraint, the more Devon realizes that the real reunion has not happened yet. The real reunion will be between the family they thought they were and the truth Malcolm is about to drag through the front door. Then Stephanie arrives, and what was simmering becomes volatile. Her return does not feel nostalgic. It feels surgical. She is too composed, too deliberate, too aware of the effect her presence will have. Where Malcolm carries guilt like a burden, Stephanie carries her secret like a mission. That difference matters. It means they are not returning to Genoa City from the same emotional place. Malcolm seems like a man haunted by what he fears he may have to admit. Stephanie seems like a woman who has already made peace with detonating lives if that is what is required. The tension between them is immediate because the years have not erased what existed. They have only compacted it, turning old passion, regret, and unfinished pain into something denser and more dangerous. When they finally face each other, the air around them changes. This is not simply about former lovers colliding with memory. It is about two people who may have spent decades protecting themselves with silence and are now being cornered by consequences. What makes Stephanie so unsettling is that she does not seem interested in softening the impact of whatever she knows. There is pain in her, but there is also resolve. And resolve is often crueler than anger because it has already chosen its direction. She has not come back to ask permission to reopen the past. She has come back because the past is no longer willing to stay buried. She knows something Malcolm does not, or perhaps something Malcolm has suspected but never dared to confirm. Either way, she holds the advantage, and for a short time, she allows that advantage to sit between them like a loaded threat. The emotional violence of that dynamic is what makes their scenes burn even before the truth is spoken. Malcolm is forced into vulnerability. Stephanie is forced into confession. Neither of them can emerge clean. From there, the story becomes a web of crossed motives, because the possible truth at the center is bigger than either of them. If Holden is indeed the living consequence of what Malcolm and Stephanie once were, then the revelation is not merely biological. It is existential. It rearranges identity, loyalty, and memory for everyone around them. Holden stops being simply a complicated young man with his own secrets, his own questionable choices, and his own fragile attempts to survive Genoa City's social minefield. He becomes evidence. He becomes the human shape of a betrayal no one knew they had already survived. And that possibility changes how every glance toward him begins to feel charged. Every prior encounter takes on new meaning. Every conflict becomes retroactively personal. For Malcolm, the possibility of Holden being his son is devastating in a way that goes beyond shock. It forces him to confront the possibility that a life he should have known, protected, and loved was stolen from him, not by death or fate, but by silence. There is a specific kind of male grief that erupts when a man realizes he has been denied his own fatherhood, and that grief does not come out noble. It comes out furious, humiliated, and self-accusing. Malcolm would rage at Stephanie, yes, but underneath that rage would be an even uglier torment directed inward. What kind of man was he that this could happen without him knowing? What signs did he miss? What moments of selfishness, distraction, or emotional cowardice helped create the conditions for this loss? The anger would make him volatile, but the guilt would make him dangerous, because guilt is what turns wounded men into men determined to rewrite reality at any cost. Stephanie's internal conflict is equally brutal, but colder. If she did hide a child, if she did allow that child to be raised elsewhere, then she has likely spent years constructing moral justifications strong enough to keep herself standing. Maybe she told herself she was protecting the baby. Maybe she told herself Malcolm was not ready. Maybe she told herself the circumstances were too messy, the future too unstable, the emotional fallout too destructive. But time corrodes every justification. What once felt like survival begins to look like theft. And once that shift begins, every choice afterward becomes harder to defend. That is why Stephanie would return not as a villain in her own mind, but as a woman reaching the breaking point of a lie she can no longer inhabit. The tragedy is that confession does not restore innocence. It only proves how long the damage has lasted. Lily stands at the emotional center of the fallout because she is not just watching an old love story collapse into scandal. She is watching the family structure around her mutate in real time. If Holden is connected to Malcolm and Stephanie, then Lily is suddenly forced to integrate a new reality while grieving all the years that reality was withheld. Her anger would not be theatrical. It would be intimate and cutting. She would feel cheated not only of the truth, but of the chance to choose how she might have loved, accepted, or rejected it on her own terms. There is a special cruelty in having life-changing information delivered after everyone else has already made irreversible choices. Lily would hate that feeling. She would hate the way it makes her seem like the last person in the room to catch up to her own life. That humiliation would sharpen her into someone unwilling to protect anyone's excuses. Malcolm may have returned, hoping for understanding. Stephanie may have returned, hoping for necessary pain. Lily would offer neither. She would demand accountability in its rawest form. And yet, because this is Genoa City, the emotional damage never stays contained within the original circle. Claire becomes an unexpected mirror in the story, because Holden's own fragile place in the social ecosystem makes him vulnerable to the exact kind of identity rupture Claire understands too well. If Claire begins to see a new side to Holden, it is not because he suddenly becomes pure or easy to trust. It is because pain has a way of stripping performance from people. A man who may have spent years surviving on instinct, charm, and carefully managed distance could begin to crack under the possibility that his entire origin story is unstable. Claire, who understands what it means to have the ground of selfhood shift beneath her, may find herself drawn toward his unraveling even while fearing it. That dynamic creates a dangerous intimacy. She may become the one person Holden does not know how to lie to once the truth starts closing in, and that would terrify him more than exposure. Holden, in this version of the story, should not receive the revelation as a gift. That would be too easy, too sentimental, too dishonest. A grown man learning that the people he thought were strangers may actually be his parents is not automatically healed by blood. He is destabilized by it. He would question every abandonment wound he has ever carried, every survival habit he built, every cynical assumption he used to protect himself from disappointment. Worse, he would have to confront the possibility that the people now reaching for him are doing so partly because the truth has forced them to, not because they earned the right to be called family. That distinction matters. Holden's rejection, if it comes, should burn. It should expose how little biology can do when trust is decades too late. He may lash out not because he is cruel, but because rage is the only form of dignity left to someone who feels like his life has been rewritten without consent. This is where the larger theme of conspiracy and struggle intensifies. The revelation is not only personal, it becomes strategic. Once whispers begin moving through Genoa City, other players start calculating. Phyllis, always alert to fracture, would recognize instantly that emotional chaos creates opportunity. If she is already tempting Kane, then she is not merely flirting with romantic or psychological mischief. She is testing pressure points across multiple family lines, looking for the moment when grief, resentment, and confusion can be redirected into leverage. Phyllis understands what many others pretend not to know. Families in crisis are easiest to manipulate when they are still trying to preserve the illusion of decency. She can smell weakness and restraint. If Lily is emotionally distracted, if Malcolm is unraveling, if Devon is pulled into quiet damage control, then other alliances can be disturbed. Kane becomes useful not because he is stable, but because instability in a man with pride is one of the easiest materials to weaponize. Kane, for his part, should not simply be a bystander tempted by someone else's agenda. He should be portrayed as a man furious with how often life in Genoa City reduces him to someone reacting to the emotional debris of others. If Phyllis approaches him when Lily is drowning in family upheaval, he may feel the old resentment returning, the toxic mixture of longing and pride that convinces a man he has been undervalued, overlooked, or used only when needed. That is how manipulation enters. Not through obvious villainy, but through the seductive logic of wounded ego. Kane begins telling himself he is just protecting his own interests, just refusing to be collateral damage again, just making sure he is not the last person left powerless when the dust settles. But those rationalizations are how bad choices dress themselves before becoming betrayal. His anger at Lily's emotional distance could slowly merge with resentment toward the entire Winter's orbit, making him susceptible to actions he would once have condemned. The most gripping version of this story does not rush the truth. It lets suspicion rot the edges of every relationship first. Lily notices Holden reacting strangely to Stephanie before he knows why. Devon sees Malcolm hovering near conversations that should not matter if his return were innocent. Claire begins defending Holden at moments when she does not yet understand why she feels compelled to do so. Phyllis collects fragments like a scavenger of emotional wreckage. Kane watches, interprets, misinterprets, and starts making private decisions that will later look unforgivable. Even Tracy, as a sounding board for Lily, becomes important not because she solves the problem, but because she helps name the psychological cost of living inside incomplete truths. The longer the confession is delayed, the more everyone begins acting on instinct instead of certainty. And instinct in Genoa City almost always leaves scars. When the truth finally breaks, it should not land as a clean announcement. It should land as a collapse. Malcolm, pushed to the edge by Stephanie's evasions and his own growing terror, corners the situation emotionally before he is ready for what he is forcing into the light. Stephanie, exhausted by years of compartmentalization, finally reveals enough to destroy the last illusion of control. Holden becomes the center of a scene he never asked to inhabit. Lily feels something inside her go cold. Devon steps in, not because he can fix anything, but because someone has to prevent pain from turning instantly into cruelty. Claire sees firsthand what inherited damage looks like when it stops being abstract. And in the middle of it all is the unbearable realization that none of these people can go back to the version of themselves that existed before this moment. Malcolm's fury should be volcanic, but not cleanly righteous. He has the right to feel robbed, but he also knows that rage alone will not restore what was taken. That impotence is what makes his anger almost unbearable. He cannot get Holden's childhood back. He cannot undo the distance. He cannot turn revelation into relationship by force. He can only stand in the ruins of lost time and confront the woman who made choices for both of them. Stephanie, meanwhile, has to withstand not only Malcolm's devastation, but Holden's possible contempt and Lily's moral condemnation. In that instant, all the years she spent containing the truth are repaid in full, not with understanding, but with the full violence of being seen clearly at last. And once such a truth explodes, the battle is no longer over what happened. It becomes a battle over narrative. Who gets to define the meaning of the secret? Was Stephanie protecting or betraying? Was Malcolm absent or deprived? Is Holden a victim, a lost son, a stranger, or all three? Does Lily owe grace to people who denied her reality? Does Claire stand by Holden if his anger makes him destructive? Does Kane exploit Lily's fracture or step back from the brink? Does Phyllis intensify the pressure because chaos is useful, or does she reveal a rare line she will not cross? These are the questions that make the story breathe beyond a single twist. The revelation matters, but the struggle over how to live with it is where the real drama begins. That is what makes this kind of Y&R arc work at its best. It is not just about a shocking family connection. It is about what hidden truths do to people who have already spent years surviving other wounds. Malcolm's return should feel like the beginning of healing, but instead it becomes the reopening of old injuries in a form no one expected. Stephanie's arrival should feel like the return of unfinished romance, but instead it becomes the arrival of judgment, confession, and irreversible consequence. Lily becomes the emotional witness forced into moral clarity. Holden becomes the living proof that silence can grow into a person-sized tragedy. Claire becomes a fragile bridge between rage and understanding. Kane and Phyllis become reminders that in Genoa City, private heartbreak is never allowed to remain private for long. It is always converted into strategy by someone. By the end, no one should feel victorious. That would cheapen it. The most powerful ending is one in which every character walks away altered, not because the truth liberated them, but because it exposed how much of their lives had been built around damage they did not fully understand. Malcolm returns to Genoa City expecting reunion and finds reckoning. Stephanie returns expecting confession and finds condemnation. Lily expects warmth and finds another reason to harden. Holden expects nothing and finds himself pulled into a family history that may explain him without healing him. Claire sees how quickly connection can become burden. Kane stands at the threshold of becoming the worst version of his resentment. Phyllis watches the city weaken around her and considers what profit can be made from pain. And that is the real pulse of the story. Not simply a secret child, not merely a long-awaited return, but a city where every buried truth is also an invitation to war. In Genoa City, the past never comes back gently. It comes back demanding blood, demanding choices, demanding that love prove whether it is stronger than humiliation, stronger than pride, stronger than the appetite to punish. Malcolm and Stephanie do not just bring history home with them. They bring the kind of truth that makes everyone around them choose who they become when forgiveness is hardest and anger feels most deserved. That is where the conspiracy deepens, where the struggle turns personal, and where every character risks discovering that the ugliest battles are not fought against enemies at all, but against the parts of themselves that pain has been shaping in silence for years.